Most people spend their entire lives trying to feel in control of their relationships, their emotions, their future, while silently drowning in thoughts they can't escape. One text left unread, one unexpected silence, one moment of uncertainty, and suddenly the mind takes over. It spins stories, creates meaning, and convinces you that your peace depends on someone else's actions. But the truth is, it never did. The Buddha taught that suffering doesn't come from what others do to us. It comes from our attachment to how we think things should be. And the moment you understand that, something begins to shift. In today's video, we're going to dive into a kind of freedom that's always been yours. You've just been looking in the wrong direction. If your mind has ever felt like a prison, or your heart like it's held hostage by thoughts you can't silence, then stay with me. Every part of this conversation holds something your soul has been quietly waiting to hear. And if you find comfort in spaces like this, where ancient wisdom meets real, messy life, there's a simple, free favor I'd love you to consider. Just tap that subscribe button so you don't miss these conversations. Whatever you do, don't skip ahead. The part you most need might be just a few seconds away. Let's walk this path together. There's a certain kind of tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. It's not the kind that comes from work or physical effort. It's the heaviness you carry in your mind, the weight of unspoken thoughts, unanswered questions, and imagined conversations. It builds up quietly. One worry turns into 10. One memory opens the door to another. And before you know it, your inner world feels cluttered, loud, and exhausting. You could be sitting in silence, doing absolutely nothing, and still feel drained. Why? Because your thoughts are not resting. They're carrying stories, most of which aren't even true. Buddha taught that suffering begins not with what happens, but with what we think about what happens. The mind is powerful, but it's also untrained. Without awareness, it pulls us into illusion. One moment someone doesn't respond to a message, and the next your mind is replaying every possible mistake you've ever made, every reason they might be upset, every worst-case scenario you can imagine. And all of this happens without anything new actually taking place. It's just you, alone with your thoughts, creating a storm out of silence. This is what makes overthinking feel so heavy. You're not just thinking, you're attaching. You're gripping tight to possibilities, fears, and what-ifs, all of which live entirely in your imagination. The Buddha compared this to carrying a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. But who gets burned first? You do. Every thought you hold onto with fear or resistance adds another layer to your suffering. And the tragedy is, most of those thoughts don't reflect reality, they reflect your fear of losing control. When we carry these mental burdens, we also close ourselves off from the present moment. We're not here. We're caught in memories or expectations. And while we're busy living in our heads, we miss the life that's unfolding in front of us. Buddha emphasized mindfulness not just as a meditation practice, but as a way of living with less weight. When you bring your attention back to now, even for a breath, you set down one of those heavy stones. There's something strange that happens when we care deeply about someone or something. We begin to grip it, not just emotionally, but mentally too. We replay conversations, overanalyze what was said, imagine every possible future, and then try to control it all with our thoughts. But if you've ever tried to hold on to water by squeezing it, you know how that ends. It slips right through your fingers. The Buddha saw this human tendency thousands of years ago and called it upadana, clinging or grasping. He taught that it's not life itself that causes suffering. It's the way we cling to it that does. In Buddhism, freedom doesn't come from getting what you want or controlling every outcome. It comes from understanding the nature of reality and then releasing your need to fight it. The Buddha explained that everything is impermanent. People change, situations evolve, emotions rise and fall like waves in the ocean. And when you resist this natural rhythm, When you demand that something stays the same forever, you create your own suffering. The pain isn't just in what's happening, but in your refusal to let it be. You might think, but if I stop holding on, won't I lose what I love? That fear is what keeps so many of us stuck. But letting go doesn't mean giving up or not caring. It means loving with open hands. It means appreciating the beauty of a moment while it's here, without trying to force it to last forever. Think about how we treat sunsets. We don't try to grab them. We just sit quietly and let them unfold. That's what real peace looks like. The Buddhist path isn't about suppressing your feelings or pretending not to care. It's about seeing things clearly and choosing not to be ruled by them. It's about stepping off the roller coaster of constant mental noise and finding stillness in your own presence. The Buddha didn't promise a life without discomfort. He promised a way to move through discomfort without being consumed by it. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? That aching pull in your chest when someone crosses your mind again and again, no matter how hard you try to shift your focus. You tell yourself it's because you care. You replay their words, analyze their tone, question your actions. You feel responsible for the distance, for the silence, for holding everything together. It feels noble, even loving. But the truth is, not all mental attention is rooted in love. Sometimes it's rooted in fear. In Buddhism, the Buddha taught that attachment disguises itself in many forms, one of the most deceptive being the belief that clinging to someone is the same as loving them. Caring is open-handed, it's compassionate, kind, and peaceful. It honors the freedom of the other person and the peace of your own heart. Obsessing, on the other hand, is like gripping a flower too tightly. It crushes the very thing you're trying to protect. When you care for someone, you want them to be happy, even if it's not with you, even if they choose something you wouldn't. But when you obsess, you become attached to the outcome. You measure their actions against your expectations. You begin to feel anxious, restless, incomplete. It's no longer about their well-being. It's about easing your own discomfort. Think about this. When was the last time you truly felt at peace while overthinking about someone? Probably never. That's because obsessing doesn't come from love. It comes from the ego. It's the part of us that fears being forgotten, being unimportant, being unloved. Buddha once said, "You only lose what you cling to." And this kind of mental and emotional clinging doesn't protect a relationship. It poisons it. It robs you of the present moment, the joy of connection, and the lightness of genuine care. There's a split second between what happens and how you respond to it. A tiny, often unnoticed space that holds incredible power. Most people live their lives without ever realizing it exists. Someone says something that triggers them, and before they can even take a breath, they're reacting. A text doesn't arrive when expected, and the mind jumps into panic, replaying all the worst-case scenarios. It feels automatic, uncontrollable, but the Buddha taught that freedom isn't found in controlling others or the outside world. It's found in learning to master that small moment before you respond. Because in that moment, you get to decide whether you want to keep suffering or step into peace. We often underestimate just how much power lies in the act of simply pausing. Pausing doesn't mean avoiding. It doesn't mean you're weak, indifferent, or running away. It means you're strong enough to stop the old cycle from repeating. It means you're aware enough to catch yourself before your emotions sweep you away. Buddha said that mindfulness is the path to the deathless, meaning the path to a kind of clarity that isn't dictated by our impulses. That awareness begins the moment you stop and breathe before reacting. Let's be honest, when you're hurt, when you're afraid, when your pride feels bruised, your first reaction is usually not your best one. It's emotional, it's rushed, it's often something you end up regretting. But when you pause, even for just a few seconds, you create space, and that space is where wisdom enters. It's where you get to ask yourself, is this response rooted in fear or in peace? Is it going to help or just add more noise? That one breath, that one heartbeat of stillness can change everything. It's strange how something so small, like a delayed reply, a distant tone in someone's voice, or even a look that feels off, can send your mind spiraling. Before you know it, you're stuck in an emotional storm, questioning your worth, replaying the moment and wondering what you did wrong. But here's the thing. It's not the situation itself that's hurting you. It's the story your mind tells about it. It's your expectations of how things should be that create the tension. The Buddha explained this clearly. We don't suffer because of the world. We suffer because of our attachment to the way we think the world should behave for us. When something doesn't go our way, when a person leaves, when a plan falls apart, or when we're misunderstood, it hits deep. Not because of the event alone, but because it clashes with the picture we built in our heads. We wanted the person to stay. We hoped the plan would succeed. We expected to be seen, heard, loved, understood. And when reality doesn't match that inner script, it hurts. The Buddha used a simple metaphor for this. He said, holding tightly to a rope causes more pain the harder you grip it. And yet we grip anyway, convinced that if we just hold on a little tighter, we can force things to return to what we wanted them to be. This is where the root of suffering lies, in resistance. In that deep, unconscious refusal to accept things as they are. We suffer because we argue with reality. We think, they shouldn't have said that, or this shouldn't be happening. But Buddha reminds us that reality doesn't bend to our opinions. Life continues flowing, indifferent to our expectations. Peace begins not when everything is perfect, but when we stop insisting that it has to be. There's something quietly powerful about the moment you stop fighting what isn't working. You know that feeling. The one where you've been holding on so tightly to a thought, a person or a situation, hoping it would change, hoping it would give you the peace you've been craving. But instead, all it gives you is tension. Your jaw is clenched, your chest feels heavy, and your mind won't stop racing. We think that if we just try harder, if we care more, if we figure out the right words or the perfect timing, things will finally make sense. But what if the peace you're searching for isn't on the other side of trying harder? What if it's waiting for you the moment you loosen your grip? Buddha often used the metaphor of the river to explain this. Life, he said, is like flowing water, always moving, always changing, always beyond our control. And yet we try to dam it with our expectations. We try to bottle it, force it, preserve it exactly the way we want it to be. But what happens when you try to hold water in your hands? The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. It's not the water that's the problem, it's the grip. That's what overthinking is, trying to grip reality with your mind instead of allowing it to flow naturally through experience. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become numb or indifferent. What it means is that you stop trying to control something that was never yours to control in the first place. You stop chasing someone's love. You stop rewriting the past in your head. You stop waiting for that one text message to determine your worth. You begin to trust, not because you have all the answers, but because you've finally realized that carrying the weight of everything is exhausting and unnecessary. You know that feeling when your head is so full. It feels like there's no room left to even breathe. Like your thoughts are stacked on top of each other. Unfinished conversations, what-ifs, regrets, fears. And it all just swirls together until you can't tell what's real and what's just your anxiety talking. That's not a flaw in you. It's what happens when we don't give the mind space to rest. The Buddha understood this well. He taught that just as the body needs nourishment, the mind needs emptiness, not in a lonely or hollow way, but in a spacious, peaceful way. A mind that's too full can't absorb anything new. It can't see clearly. It's like trying to pour tea into a cup that's already overflowing. It spills everywhere and nothing is truly received. That's how many of us live. We keep pouring more thoughts, more fears, more noise into an already overwhelmed mind. We chase clarity while clinging to clutter, and then we wonder why we can't find peace. But the solution isn't to think harder or analyze more. It's to create space. Buddha often spoke of this using nature. He compared the mind to a still lake. Only when the water is calm can we see our reflection. In the same way, only when our mind is clear can we truly see what matters, what is true, what needs to be done. But stillness doesn't come from silence alone. It comes from letting go of what's unnecessary. Letting go isn't forgetting or pretending things don't matter. It's deciding that your peace matters more than obsessing over every detail. It's realizing that not every thought deserves your attention. Not every emotion needs a response. Some things simply need space to pass. When we empty the mind, through breath, meditation, even a mindful pause, we create room for wisdom. We make space for joy, for insight, for compassion. That emptiness isn't emptiness at all. It's the most nourishing thing we can give ourselves. The Buddha taught that an uncluttered mind is the foundation of right thinking, right action, right living. Think about how many times you've felt completely drained by the end of the day, and not because you ran a marathon or worked a double shift, but because your mind wouldn't stop running. You were caught in loops, replaying what someone said, worrying about what they didn't, wondering if you were enough, if you did too much, or not enough. This kind of exhaustion isn't physical. It's emotional. It's mental. And most of the time it comes from giving your energy to people and situations that don't deserve to hold that much space in your life. The Buddha taught that peace is not something given to you by others. It arises when the mind is free from unnecessary grasping. So ask yourself honestly, where is your energy going? When you overthink about someone who hasn't reached out, when you analyze a conversation that ended hours ago, when you imagine worst-case scenarios that haven't even happened yet, you are spending your life in a place that isn't real. And what you spend your attention on, you feed, you nurture, you keep alive. That person who hurt you, they might be living their life without a second thought, while you're still carrying the weight of their actions in your mind. That relationship that ended, it might be over on the outside, but you've kept it alive through constant mental replay. And while you do that, you are handing over your peace, quietly, completely. Buddha often spoke of guarding the sense doors, meaning to be mindful of what you allow into your mental space. Not every thought deserves to stay. Not every person deserves a seat at the table of your attention. Your energy is sacred, it's not infinite, and every ounce you spend overthinking about someone who doesn't value your presence is energy you could have invested in healing, growing, or simply being at peace. We forget this sometimes. We think if we just think enough, we'll find closure, understanding, or control. But the mind isn't a container meant to be filled with explanations. It's meant to be clear, spacious, and aware. It's strange, isn't it? One small thought can change your entire day. You could be having a peaceful morning, sipping tea, listening to the birds, and suddenly a memory sneaks in. Something someone said weeks ago, or worse, something you wish you'd said but didn't. And just like that, your peace is gone. You're no longer in the moment. You're in your head, replaying scenes, analyzing emotions, trying to make sense of things that might not even matter anymore. That's the power of an unchecked mind. And yet, the Buddha gently reminded us, you are not your thoughts. The mind is an incredible tool, but it can also become your master if you're not careful. It speaks in your voice. It remembers everything you've ever felt, feared, or regretted, and it doesn't hesitate to bring it all up at the most inconvenient times. But here's the secret. The mind is not you. It's not your identity. It's not your soul. It's more like weather, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, always changing. But the sky behind the weather, that's who you are. Still, spacious, untouched. The Buddha taught that our suffering is deeply rooted in the illusion that we are our minds. That when the mind is restless, we believe we are restless. When the mind feels rejected, we believe we are unworthy. But you are not the stories your mind tells. You are the awareness that sees the stories. You are the witness. And that shift, from being lost in thought to simply observing thought, is one of the most powerful moments on the path to awakening. You know that feeling when your mind just won't sit still, when it hops from one thought to the next, replaying the past, rehearsing the future, and never letting you truly rest. One moment you're remembering something someone said years ago, the next you're worrying about something that hasn't even happened yet. It's exhausting, and yet, most of us live in this state day after day without even realizing we're trapped in it. The Buddha described this as the monkey mind, a mind that leaps and spins and refuses to land. But he also taught that we are not powerless in the face of this chaos. We can train the mind. And the tool he offered us is simple: mindfulness. Mindfulness isn't some complicated practice reserved for monks or spiritual masters. It's as accessible as your next breath. It's the art of bringing your attention back to this moment, this breath, this body, this life. Because right here in the now, there's no story to spin. There's no memory to chase. There's no fear of what hasn't come yet. There's just you and your direct experience. And when you live from that place, even just for a moment, the noise begins to fade. Think of your mind like a glass of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, thought after thought, worry after worry, it stays cloudy. But if you let it sit, the mud begins to settle and the water clears. That's what mindfulness does. It helps you stop stirring the water so you can finally see things as they are. It doesn't make problems disappear, but it gives you the clarity to respond instead of react. It shows you that not every thought deserves your attention, not every worry is real, and not every feeling needs to be fixed. Sometimes we think the only way to find peace is to completely shut off our emotions, distance ourselves from people, or convince ourselves that we no longer care. And when that doesn't work, we swing to the other extreme. We overthink every message, cling to every word someone says, replay conversations on a loop, and try to read between every line. But here's the truth the Buddha understood deeply. Neither extreme brings freedom. Neither avoiding your feelings nor drowning in them will give you the clarity you're searching for. What you need is balance, a steady middle path that allows you to feel fully without being consumed. Buddhism teaches this middle way as a principle for everything, not just how we treat others, but how we treat our own minds. The Buddha discovered this after living a life of both extreme indulgence and severe self-denial. He realized that peace wasn't in starving the body or feeding every desire. It was in the space between the extremes, and that same wisdom applies to your thoughts and emotions. When you attach too tightly to someone, it causes suffering. But if you force yourself to let go completely and suppress what you feel, it creates a quiet kind of numbness that isn't peaceful either. You're not healing, you're just hiding. Think of your thoughts like a musical string. If it's too loose, it can't play a sound. If it's too tight, it snaps. But with just the right tension, it creates harmony. Your mind works the same way. When you hold space for your emotions without letting them overpower you, when you acknowledge your thoughts without becoming trapped by them, that's balance. That's where healing begins. You know what's strange? So many of us walk through life believing we're stuck. We tell ourselves stories like, "I can't move on," "I need closure," or "they owe me an explanation." We repeat these thoughts until they start to feel like facts. But they're not. They're just thoughts. Loud, emotional, persistent, but still just thoughts. And they create a prison we don't even realize we're living in. We decorate the walls with memories, justify the locks with logic, and wait for someone else to come along and hand us the key. But what if I told you the door has been open this whole time? Buddha often said that liberation comes not from changing the world around us, but from changing our relationship to our thoughts. The mind wants to believe that if we think just a little longer, we'll solve it. If we figure out what went wrong, if we understand why someone hurt us, if we get the answers we crave, then finally, we'll be free. But freedom doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from realizing you don't need to. That aching desire for control, for certainty, for understanding. It's not the path to peace. It's the barrier to it. What holds us back isn't usually the pain itself. It's the way we hold on to it. It's the way we replay a conversation, trying to edit it into something we can live with. It's the way we wait for someone to make it right, not realizing that waiting is a choice too. Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering. When you cling to the past, to expectations, to people, you become a prisoner of your own mind. But the mind is not a jailer, it's a tool. And once you see that, you stop asking for the door to be opened. You simply walk through it. There's something incredibly powerful about realizing you can release someone without erasing them from your heart. Letting go doesn't mean turning your back on what you felt. It doesn't mean pretending that the connection never mattered. It simply means you are choosing peace over attachment. In Buddhism, the Buddha reminded us that clinging is what causes suffering, not love itself. So when someone leaves your life, or when a situation doesn't turn out the way you hoped, it's not the loss that hurts most. It's the tight grip you had on how things should have been. But when you learn to loosen that grip, you begin to breathe again. You make space for healing. So many people confuse letting go with giving up or with cold detachment. But that's not what Buddhism teaches. Non-attachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without clinging. You love without needing to possess. You value what was shared, but you no longer need it to continue in order to feel whole. It's like standing at the edge of a river watching a boat drift away. You can wave, you can smile, you can even feel sadness, but you don't have to jump in and try to swim after it. The Buddha taught that freedom isn't found in holding tightly, it's found in knowing when to release. There's also a quiet wisdom in understanding that some people are only meant to walk beside us for a short stretch of the path. Maybe they came to teach us something. Maybe we were meant to show them something, and maybe the most compassionate thing you can do for them and for yourself is to let them go with love instead of resistance. That way, there's no bitterness in your heart, there's no shame in your story, just acceptance, just peace. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is release what weighs you down and trust that peace will rise in its place. You don't have to chase, cling, or control to feel whole. You just have to come back to yourself. Thank you for walking this path with us today. If this touched something in you, there's another video waiting right here that will guide you even deeper. And as always, thank you for being a part of this Buddhist journey.